In a quiet mountain town, where winters are long and hearts grow strong, one struggling single father has spent 15 years raising an abandoned girl, never knowing where she came from, only that she belonged with him. But when a poised, mysterious woman arrives from the world of billionaires, carrying secrets buried beneath years of silence, everything Jack Callahan thought he knew about love, sacrifice, and family will be tested. What happens when the woman who left returns, not to reclaim what was lost, but to heal it? This is not just a story about second chances. It's about how kindness, patience, and unexpected love can build miracles in the most unlikely places. If stories of quiet strength, healing hearts, and life's small miracles move you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Join us as we journey through love, forgiveness, and the beauty of second chances. Now, let's begin. Struggling single dad raises abandoned girl when her billionaire mother returns to heal their hearts. The snow had long stopped falling, but the world outside Jack Callahan's cabin still wore its heavy coat of white. The evergreens stood motionless under the weight, branches drooping like old men weary of winter. A hush blanketed the small mountain town, as if even the wind had forgotten how to howl. Inside, Jack moved quietly, the familiar creak of old wooden floors the only sound accompanying him. His large, calloused hands worked methodically as he set two places at the modest kitchen table, one for himself, one for Lily. 15 years. 15 long, quiet, stubbornly beautiful years. Jack's eyes drifted to the photograph sitting on the mantel above the fireplace. A younger man stared back at him, less gray in the beard, less weathering around the eyes. Next to him, a baby, bundled in mismatched blankets, cheeks red from the cold, eyes wide and unsure. Lily, the girl he'd found abandoned that night so many winters ago. He still remembered the way the snow crunched beneath his boots as he trudged down the narrow mountain road, heading home from the workshop. The night was cold enough to freeze breath in midair. He'd thought he'd heard something, maybe a coyote at first. But then there it was, a soft, human cry breaking through the hush of snowfall. She had been left just off the roadside, half buried, in blankets far too thin for a Colorado winter. No note, no explanation, only those big, scared eyes peeking out, meeting his like she already knew him. Some men might have turned to the authorities right away. Maybe they would have called the sheriff, let the system decide, but Jack wasn't most men. That night, standing in the snow, the weight of her in his arms, something settled in his chest, something solid, immovable. She was his. A knock at the door snapped him out of the memory. "Come in," he called, his voice rough from disuse. Lily pushed open the door, cheeks flushed from the cold, scarf trailing behind her like a flag. Her long brown hair escaped her knit cap, eyes bright despite the bite of winter air. "Hey, Dad," she greeted, shaking snow off her coat. "Everything all right in town?" Jack asked, pouring her a cup of cocoa. "Same as always," she said, dropping into her chair. "Mrs. Jensen's still complaining about the tourists, and Doc Miller says we're in for another storm tonight." Jack grunted, but his eyes softened as he slid the cocoa toward her. She wrapped her hands around it gratefully, glancing up. "At him? You hear from Mr. Thompson yet about the new chair commission?" she asked. Jack shook his head. "No rush. Folks around here aren't in much need of fancy furniture." Lily hesitated, then set her cup down carefully. "Dad, have you ever thought about where I came from?" The question settled heavily in the room. Jack's fingers drummed lightly against the table, gaze flickering to the window, where snowflakes had begun to drift lazily once again. "I've thought about it," he admitted after a pause. Lily chewed her lip, something she hadn't done since she was a little girl. "Do you think my mother, ever thinks about me?" Jack met her eyes, the same shade of deep hazel as the woman he'd once loved. and felt the familiar ache in his chest. He hated not having answers, hated that the past hung over her like an unfinished sentence. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I know one thing. You're exactly where you're meant to be." Lily smiled faintly, but he could tell. Her thoughts lingered elsewhere. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Jack sat alone by the fireplace, the warmth crackling faintly against the silence. He pulled open the old drawer of the side table, retrieving a worn, yellowed envelope, the one piece of the past he'd never shared. Inside was a hospital bracelet, tiny, still bearing the name Baby Girl Hartwell. No first name, no explanation, just a last name. He'd told himself for years it didn't matter, that what counted was the life he and Lily built here in the mountains, far from whatever had driven her mother to leave. But now, seeing the curiosity in Lily's eyes, the longing for something just beyond reach, it stirred something deep in him. Perhaps some stories couldn't stay buried forever. Outside, the wind began to howl again, like it had all those years ago, carrying secrets down the mountain. And Jack couldn't shake the feeling that someone was finally coming back with it. The sleek black car didn't belong. It glided through the winding roads of the mountain town like a shadow out of place, its polished exterior catching the glint of the winter sun. The houses it passed, modest cabins with smoking chimneys and porches sagging under snow, seemed to lean away from it, as if aware this visitor wasn't cut from the same cloth. Vivian Hartwell sat behind the wheel, knuckles white on the steering wheel, despite the heater humming softly. She had traded her penthouse office view for this endless stretch of pine trees and mountains, though her mind still moved at the frantic pace of Manhattan boardrooms. She hadn't been back to Colorado in over 15 years, hadn't breathed this sharp, thin air, or looked at a sky so wide it made you feel small. But none of that was why her chest tightened with every turn of the road. Vivian had built a life meticulously. CEO, philanthropist, magazine cover darling. She wore success like armor, perfectly tailored, impenetrable. But there was one crack in it, one secret no amount of stock options or press releases could fill. Her daughter. She still remembered that night, the storm raging, when she'd stood at the edge of her family's estate, clutching a newborn in trembling arms. Her father's voice, sharp as broken glass, ringing in her ears. "You want to destroy everything we've built over a mistake. Fix it. Disappear if you have to. Just don't come back with that child." And she hadn't. Not until now. Her fingers tightened as the GPS blinked. Welcome to Maplewood. Population 1,436. Vivian's gaze swept the quiet streets. No gleaming skyscrapers, no flashing billboards, just weathered shop signs, a gas station, a diner with a hand-painted window that read, "Come in for warmth." Her eyes caught a small wooden workshop near the edge of town, Callahan Carpentry. The name tugged something sharp and unfamiliar inside her. She parked across the street, killing the engine, her breath fogging the windshield. She sat there for a moment longer, unsure why her hands trembled. Inside the workshop, Jack Callahan wiped sawdust from his hands, the steady rhythm of his day, a comfort he didn't question. The scent of pine filled the air, mingling with the faint hum of country radio in the background. His projects stood around him like silent witnesses, half-finished chairs, tables smoothed by calloused fingers. Then, he glanced up, frowning slightly. Across the street, the black car sat motionless, windows tinted, unfamiliar plates. Visitors weren't rare in Maplewood, but something about the stillness of that vehicle put Jack on edge. A moment later, the driver's door opened. The woman who stepped out looked like she belonged to another world entirely. She was tall, elegant, wrapped in a tailored coat that probably cost more than Jack made in a month. Her dark hair was pinned neatly, but it was the way she stood, controlled, guarded, that caught Jack's eye. Like someone used to holding people at a distance, their eyes met for only a second before she quickly looked away, turning to survey the street as if she was unsure where to begin. Jack's gut told him something. People didn't come to Maplewood by accident. Vivian hesitated on the sidewalk, clutching her coat tighter. The air smelled like cedar and snow, sharp and clean, so different from the city's exhaust and perfume. She felt stripped bare out here. No towering buildings to hide behind. She forced herself forward, walking aimlessly past storefronts. Locals glanced at her politely, but with curiosity. Outsiders were rare. Her steps slowed when she reached a diner. Through the window she saw families laughing, a waitress refilling coffee, the kind of simple warmth that felt foreign, yet painfully familiar. Without thinking, she pushed open the door, the bell jingling overhead. "Take a seat wherever you like," the waitress called, her smile easy. Vivian slid into a corner booth, hands wrapped tightly around the laminated menu. She wasn't here for coffee, but she needed somewhere to think. Before long, the waitress returned, refilling her cup without asking. "Passing through, hon?" she asked kindly. Vivian hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Something like that," she said, voice softer than she intended. The waitress nodded knowingly, as if she'd seen her share of people searching for something they couldn't quite name. Back at the workshop, Jack kept glancing toward the diner across the street. Something about that woman gnawed at him. Not fear exactly, but a sense that she carried stories not easily told. He shook his head, turning back to the chair he was working on, but the unease stayed. Vivian stared out the window, the steam from her untouched coffee swirling between her and the world outside. Her phone vibrated. Another board member wondering when she'd be back in New York, when she'd stop chasing ghosts. She silenced it. Her eyes drifted across the street again, landing on the wooden sign, Callahan Carpentry. Her heartbeat thudded painfully. She knew the name. The investigator she'd hired had sent her reports, but she hadn't expected the sight of it to feel like a punch to the ribs. Jack Callahan, the man who, for reasons she still didn't understand, had raised her daughter when she herself had. Not Vivian pressed trembling fingers to her lips, swallowing hard. Tomorrow, she told herself, tomorrow she'd find a way to speak to him. The morning sun filtered through the tall pines, casting long shadows across the narrow streets of Maplewood. The town slowly stirred to life. Shopkeepers unlocking doors, the smell of fresh bread wafting from the bakery, a few kids trudging toward the schoolhouse with scarves wrapped tightly around their faces. Jack Callahan stood outside his workshop, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. His gaze flickered across the street toward the diner where the black car still sat parked at the curb. Whoever she was, she hadn't left. He'd always trusted his instincts. Something told him that woman wasn't just another visitor passing through, not with the way she'd glanced at his shop yesterday, like she knew something about him he didn't know himself. As if on cue, the diner's door chimed, and there she was again. Vivian Hartwell stepped out, her coat drawn close against the crisp air. She paused on the sidewalk, scanning the street with that same guarded expression Jack had seen before. Before he could stop himself, he called out, "You looking for someone?" She startled slightly, then met his gaze across the road. For a moment, the sound of town life seemed to fade. Vivienne crossed toward him, careful, composed, but Jack noticed how tightly her hands clenched the strap of her purse. "I suppose," she answered, her voice smooth but edged with something fragile. "I've just arrived in town. I'm searching for someone, actually." Jack nodded slowly, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Maplewood's small. Folks don't stay strangers for long. Maybe I can help." There was a flicker in her eyes, hesitation, calculation, before she extended a hand. "Vivienne," she said simply. "Jack," he replied, shaking her hand briefly, feeling how soft and cold it was against his rougher grip. An awkward silence settled between them. The sounds of town life resuming around them, cars passing, distant laughter, the rustling of the wind through trees. Vivian glanced at the wooden sign above his workshop, then back at him. "I noticed your shop yesterday. You build furniture, mostly repairs these days," Jack said, shrugging. "Few commissions here and there." She nodded, clearly searching for words, then cleared her throat. "Actually, I've inherited an old cabin not far from here. It needs some fixing up. Thought I'd stay for a while. Maybe you could take a look." Jack studied her for a beat longer, something unspoken tugging at the edges of the conversation. But years of small-town manners had taught him when to press and when to wait. "I can stop by this afternoon," he said finally. "Where's the place?" She gave him an address, one Jack recognized immediately. It was the old Hartwell property, abandoned for years after the wealthy Hartwell family had pulled stakes and disappeared from town without explanation. He'd almost forgotten the name, but now hearing it from her lips stirred something unsettled. Vivian gave a polite smile, almost rehearsed. "Thank you, Jack. I appreciate it." He watched as she walked away, her heels clicking softly against the pavement until she disappeared down the street. Something about her felt like a loose thread in the fabric of his quiet life. One tug, and the whole thing might unravel. That afternoon, Jack loaded his truck with tools, thoughts still clouded from the morning. Lily had noticed. "Everything all right, Dad?" she asked over lunch, her eyes sharp, always observant. Jack offered a small smile. "Ran into someone new in town. Wants some work done on the old Hartwell cabin." Lily perked up. "The Hartwells? Haven't heard that name in forever." "You know who she is?" Jack shook his head, wiping his hands. Not yet, but something told him it wouldn't stay that way for long. The drive up to the Hartwell property was familiar, though the road had grown more overgrown over the years. Pines lined either side, the mountains rising like silent sentinels beyond. When he arrived, the cabin looked much as he remembered, grand in structure, but weathered, weary. Shutters hung loose. The front porch sagged slightly, yet there was still an elegance clinging to the bones of the place. Vivian was already there, standing on the porch with her coat wrapped tight, hands shoved in her pockets. Jack stepped out, nodding politely. Place could use some love. She glanced at him, something flickering behind her composed expression. "It's been neglected too long. Thought maybe it was time to bring it back." Jack walked the perimeter, inspecting. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable but weighted, like both knew there were more words beneath the surface, neither quite ready to voice them. "Windows'll need replacing," Jack said finally. "Floorboards inside might be warped from moisture. I'll need to check." Vivian nodded but didn't move to follow. Instead, she stood still, eyes focused on the distant tree line. "Did you grow up here?" Jack asked, curiosity getting the better of him. For a second, she seemed caught off guard. Then she nodded slowly. "A long time ago." Her voice softened, the polished CEO exterior cracking just slightly. "I left for reasons, but there are some things you can't leave behind forever." Jack studied her profile, sensing there was more she wasn't saying, but again, he knew when to wait. "All right," he said quietly, "we'll get it fixed." She turned then, finally meeting his gaze. And for a heartbeat, Jack saw not the polished stranger, but a woman carrying something heavy, fragile beneath the surface. "Thank you," she said simply. As he drove back down the mountain, Jack couldn't shake the feeling. Two worlds had collided. That day, his simple, sturdy one, and whatever polished, complicated life she came from. And though he didn't know why yet, instinct told him this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. The winter sun dipped early behind the mountains, casting long shadows across Maplewood as the day folded into dusk. In Jack Callahan's cabin, the soft hum of a wood-burning stove filled the space, blending with the rhythmic chopping of vegetables and the faint crackle of firewood. Lily moved about the small kitchen with practiced ease, her sleeves rolled up, hair hastily tied back. She hummed a quiet tune, the kind of melody Jack couldn't quite place, but felt like something old and familiar. Jack stood by the window, wiping his hands on a dish towel, his gaze flickering occasionally toward the snow-covered path outside. His thoughts had been restless since that afternoon at the Hartwell cabin, since the woman, Vivian, had quietly entered their lives. He didn't know why she lingered so heavily in his mind. Maybe it was the guarded way she carried herself, like someone walking through life bracing for impact. Or maybe it was the way she looked at the old house, like she was trying to rebuild more than just broken shutters. Whatever it was, he couldn't. Quite shake it. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Lily glanced up from where she was stirring soup. Expecting someone? Jack frowned, shaking his head. He crossed the room and opened the door. There she was. Vivian stood on the porch, a scarf wrapped neatly around her neck, her breath curling visibly in the cold air. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, voice careful but steady. Jack blinked, momentarily thrown off. "Evening," he managed, stepping aside. "Everything all right?" She hesitated, eyes flicking past him into the warm glow of the cabin. I wanted to thank you for earlier, and I realized I haven't eaten all day." Her lips curled into something like a nervous smile. "Diner coffee only goes so far." Jack's brow quirked slightly, but he stepped back. "You're welcome to join us." Lily peeked from behind the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands. "We've got more, and then enough," she added cheerfully, her curiosity clearly piqued. Vivian offered a polite nod and stepped inside, removing her gloves. The warmth of the cabin wrapped around her like a soft blanket, smelling faintly of pine, cinnamon, and something simmering on the stove. Jack motioned to the small table as Lily quickly set out another bowl, stealing glances at their unexpected. "Guest Lily," Jack introduced gruffly. "This is Vivian." Vivian's gaze softened as she looked at Lily, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. "It's nice to meet you, Lily." "You too," Lily replied, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. I don't think we've had anyone for dinner in a while." Vivian smiled faintly, lowering herself into the chair. "Neither have I." The meal passed with simple conversation, the kind that meandered comfortably, never prying but never empty. Lily asked about the old Hartwell cabin, and Vivian, careful with her words, spoke vaguely of memories long gone. Jack listened more. Then he spoke, noting how Vivian's polished exterior seemed to soften around the edges under lamplight. Her laughter quiet but genuine when Lily made some offhand joke about town gossip. For a while, it almost felt ordinary. As Lily cleared the dishes, Jack poured coffee, setting the chip mugs down without ceremony. Vivian accepted hers with a quiet thank you, fingers curling around the warmth. A silence settled between them, not awkward, but reflective. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick and lazy. Vivian's eyes traced the worn wood beams above, the photographs on the mantel, one in particular catching her attention. Her breath caught slightly. A younger Jack stood in the photo, cradling a baby girl swaddled in mismatched blankets. The edges of the image had faded, but the emotion in it hadn't. She felt something tighten in her chest. "That's Lily, isn't it?" she asked softly. Jack followed her gaze, nodding. "Day I found her." Vivian swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "No family nearby?" Jack shook his head, leaning back in his chair. "Sheriff never turned up anyone looking. Sometimes folks leave more behind than they can carry." His words lingered in the room like the warmth of the fire. Vivian glanced down at her hands, her heart pounding. There were so many things she wanted to say, needed to say, but none seemed to fit the moment. Instead, she lifted her gaze and offered quietly, "She seems happy." Jack's eyes softened. "She is." For a brief moment, Vivian wondered what her life might have looked like had she made different choices. Whether simple meals like this, quiet, steady love, might have been hers. Later, as she stood at the door, pulling her scarf tight once more, Jack held it open, the wind sweeping softly past. "Thank you," she said again, voice quieter now. Jack met her eyes, something steady beneath his usual reserve. "You're welcome any time."